adjusted her beautiful red dress as she walked into the fancy fast food restaurant. Her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor, her presence turned heads as usual. She knew people admired her. She was used to it. Amaka's beauty was the kind that demanded a second look. Flawless skin, a curved figure, and eyes that seemed to hold a secret of the universe. Yet, behind the beautiful exterior, she was just a woman searching for a perfect piece during her lunch break. She scanned the crowded room and found a small corner table. As she settled down with her order, a simple meal and a refreshing glass of orange juice, she pulled out her phone, scrolling through her emails. The sound of people talking around her felt comforting as she sat alone. Fred walked in a few moments later, tall, dressed smartly in a navy blue suit, and full of confidence. He looked every bit like the successful businessman he was. His day had been busy, but he decided to grab a quick meal before his next meeting. As he looked around for a free seat, his eyes fell on Amaka, and for a moment, it felt like everything around him paused. Fred wasn't one to be easily impressed, but there was something about her that captivated him instantly. Perhaps it was the way her skin glowed under the fluorescent lights, or the serene focus on her face as she read something on her phone. Whatever it was, he knew he had to talk to her. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, something he rarely needed to do, he approached her table. "Excuse me, miss. Would you mind if I joined you? It's quite packed in here." Amaka looked up, startled. Her gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment, neither spoke. Finally, she offered a polite smile. "Sure, go ahead." She gestured to the seat across from her. Fred sat down, placing his tray on the table. "Thank you. I'm Fred, by the way." "Amaka," she replied simply, taking another sip of her juice. "Beautiful name for a beautiful lady," he said, his tone earnest but not overbearing. Amaka smiled softly, brushing off the compliment. For a while, they ate in silence. Fred occasionally glanced at her, stealing moments to admire her profile. Finally, summoning his courage, he struck up a conversation. "So, do you come here often?" Amaka raised an eyebrow, a playful smile on her lips. "Really? That's the best you could come up with. An overused pickup line." Fred laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Fair enough, let me try again. So what do you do when you're not fending off guys like me at fast food joints?" Amaka looked at him. "I work in finance. And you?" "Business, imports and exports," Fred replied. "It's demanding, but rewarding. Keeps me on my toes." They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing effortlessly. Fred's humor and charm chipped away at Amaka's initial wariness, and she found herself laughing at his anecdotes. When it was time for them to leave, Fred hesitated before speaking. "Amaka, I know this might be forward, but I'd really like to see you again. Can I have your number?" She studied him for a moment, noting the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she nodded, pulling out her phone. "Sure, but don't make me regret it." Fred laughed as they exchanged numbers. "You won't, I promise." As they parted ways, Fred couldn't stop smiling. He had met countless women, but none like Amaka. She was captivating, intelligent, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that intrigued him. He spent the rest of the day distracted, replaying the conversation in his mind. Amaka found herself thinking about Fred. He was different from the usual men who approached her, genuine and respectful. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of excitement. Amaka's phone beeped constantly on her desk as she struggled to focus on her task at work. It had been just a day since Fred had boldly asked for her contact, and he had wasted no time in making use of it. Amaka could not help but smile as she read his last text. Good afternoon, pretty. I hope your day is as bright as your smile was yesterday. How about dinner tomorrow evening? She leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. Fred was direct but charming, a combination that both thrilled and unnerved her. She typed a quick response. Hi Fred, good afternoon. Dinner sounds nice. What's the plan? Fred replied almost immediately. Perfect. I will pick you up at 7 p.m. Be ready for a surprise. The anticipation of their upcoming date lingered with her throughout the day. That evening, she called her best friend Tenny to tell her the details of their initial meeting. Tenny, Amaka hesitated, searching for the right words. He's different, confident but not arrogant. And the way he looks at me, I've never felt this way before. Tenny teased, her voice dripping with skepticism. Just make sure he's not too good to be true. You know these Lagos men can be tricky. But honestly, if he's making you happy, I'm here for you. By the time Friday evening arrived, Amaka was a bundle of nerves. She wore a simple but elegant black dress that hugged her curves tastefully, and her makeup was subtle yet radiant. She barely had time to calm herself when Fred's sleek black SUV pulled up in front of her house. He stepped out, dressed in a navy blue suit that screamed elegance. Wow, Amaka, Fred said, his eyes widening as he took her in. You looked stunning. She smiled shyly. Thank you. You clean up well yourself. Fred opened the car door for her, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. As they drove through the city, they engaged in light conversation, laughing and teasing each other as if they've known each other for years. Fred eventually parked in front of an upscale rooftop restaurant that offered a breathtaking view of the Lagos skyline. You really went all out, Amaka said as they were escorted to their table. Nothing but the best for a woman like you. Dinner was filled with amazing food and easy conversation. Fred talked about his business and Amaka shared bits of her life and goals. They found common values and dreams that created an unspoken connection between them. As the evening wore on, Fred leaned forward, his expression earnest. Amaka, I'm not one to beat about the bush. Meeting you has been the highlight of my week, and I'd like to see where this can go. What do you think? Amaka's heart skipped a beat. She was taken aback by his honesty, but found it refreshing. I feel the same way. Let's take it one step at a time. Fred nodded, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. That's all I can ask. The ride back home was quiet. Fred walked her to her door, and before saying goodbye, he hesitated. Amaka, can I call you tomorrow? He asked, his voice soft. You'd better, she replied with a grin. From that day onward, their lives became intertwined. Fred's daily calls and sweet texts became the highlights of Amaka's day. He made an effort to meet her for lunch whenever their schedules allowed, and their weekends were filled with adventures, exploring art galleries, attending concerts, and even quiet evenings cooking together at Fred's place. Their love grew like a well-watered plant, thriving under mutual care and attention. Amaka introduced Fred to her family, who were immediately impressed by her charisma and sincerity. Fred's friend, too, welcomed Amaka with open arms, often joking that he had finally met his match. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through a park hand in hand, Fred turned to Amaka with a serious expression. You've changed my life in ways I can't explain, he said. I want to keep building this with you. Amaka, I'm all in. Amaka's eyes welled with tears. Fred, I feel the same. Let's see where this journey takes us. Neither of them knew it then, but this was the start of a love story that would face challenges they could never anticipate. Fred proposed and Amaka accepted to marry him. The wedding day of Amaka and Fred was nothing short of magical. Friends and family gathered from far and wide to witness the union of two souls who seemed destined for each other. The venue was packed with elaborate floral arrangements, and the air was filled with laughter, joy, and a sense of love. Amaka walked down the aisle, her radiance drawing attention from the congregation. Fred stood at the altar, his eyes filled with unmistakable adoration. This was the start of forever, sealed with a promise and a kiss. Their first year of marriage was beautiful. Fred showered Amaka with attention, affection, surprising her with thoughtful gifts and romantic getaways. Amaka, in turn, made their home a heaven, her warmth and charm turning every corner into a cozy sanctuary. They often stayed up late, sharing dreams and secrets, planning a future brimming with possibilities. Yet, as idyllic as it seemed, cracks began to form beneath the surface. Fred's success in business allowed them a little of comfort, but his insistence that Amaka resign from her job was a point of contention. Amaka loved her work and found fulfillment in her role, but Fred was adamant. "I just don't want you stressing yourself, my love," Fred said one evening over dinner. "I can take care of you. Focus on building our home." "Fred, I understand," Amaka replied, her voice steady but filled with sadness. "But my work isn't just about money. It's about purpose. I feel alive when I'm working." "You are alive here, with me," he countered, reaching for her hand. "Let me take care of you." Eventually, Amaka accepted, not wanting to strain their relationship. He handed in her resignation and poured herself into her role as Fred's partner. Yet, a small part of her felt lost. She didn't want this path. Months later, Amaka shared the news that would change their lives forever. She was pregnant. Fred's joy knew no bound. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the room. "You've made me the happiest man alive," he exclaimed, his laughter filling their home. Amaka's pregnancy became a shared project. Fred attended every doctor's appointment, fused over her diet, and bought baby items with almost comical enthusiasm. Amaka glowed, her beauty taking on a maternal softness that made her even more captivating in Fred's eyes. They prepared for their son's arrival as a team, selecting names, decorating the nursery, and dreaming of the life they would build as a family. When their baby boy was born, they called him Praise. The tiny bundle brought an unexplainable joy to their lives. Fred marveled at the delicate features of his son, his heart swelling with pride. Amaka, though exhausted, held her baby close, whispering promises of love and protection. But as the months passed, the physical toll of motherhood became evident. Amaka's once beautiful body filled out. She became fatter, with stretch marks all over, and the sleepless nights she had during her pregnancy dulled her vibrant energy. She noticed Fred's gaze linger less often, his compliments failing. One evening, as Amaka put Praise to sleep, Fred returned home late. His mood was sour, and his words, sharper than usual, cut through the air. "Amaka, you need to do something about yourself," he said, barely looking at her. "You're letting yourself go." Amaka's eyes widened. "Fred, I just had a baby. It's been a year of changes." "Changes shouldn't mean neglecting yourself," he interrupted. "Look at you. The woman I married wouldn't look like this." Tears welled up in Amaka's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I'm doing my best, Fred. Motherhood is..." "Excuses," he said flatly, walking past her. "Do better." Amaka cried herself to sleep that night, her son in her arms, She remembered the man who couldn't take his eyes off her in the fast food restaurant, who declared his love in front of hundreds of people on their wedding day. This man, now cold and distant, felt like a stranger. The once warm atmosphere of their home grew colder. Fred's criticism became more frequent, and his time at home grew shorter. Amaka's attempts to rekindle their connection were met with indifference or outright rejection. Yet, Amaka held on to hope. For her son, for her marriage, and for herself, she resolved to find a way forward, even if it meant navigating uncharted waters alone. The days following the birth of their son were bittersweet for Amaka. Though she loved her child deeply, she couldn't ignore the growing distance between herself and Fred. What had once been a marriage full of laughter, affection, and shared dreams had become strained and cold. Fred's abusive words cut deep, and his late nights became a regular occurrence. Every sharp comment about her body, her appearance, her word felt like a dagger, leaving her to cry silently after putting their baby to bed. Amaka's mother, upon hearing of Fred's behavior, begged her to come home. "You don't deserve this, Amaka," her mother said over the phone one evening. "A marriage should build you up, not tear you down. Come home, my daughter." But Amaka hesitated. Deep within her, she held on to a hope that Fred might change, that the man who once adored her was still there. Her father, usually a quiet observer, weighed in one evening. "Amaka," he said gently, "you are strong, but even the strongest need to step away from harm. You deserve peace, even if it's alone." His words lingered in her mind long after the call ended. Amaka's breaking point came during a confrontation with Fred one evening, after he stumbled home reeking of alcohol and perfume. He lashed out at her over a meal she had spent hours preparing. "Why can't you be like those women?" he spat. "They take care of themselves. Look at you, a fat cow, clinging to a past that's long gone." Amaka stood frozen, her heart pounding, but this time she didn't cry. She looked at him, at the man who once claimed she was his ward and only saw a stranger. She realized then that she couldn't let her son grow up thinking this was what love looked like. Determined to reclaim her life, Amaka began making quiet but bold moves. She reached out to old friends, ones she had lost touch with during her romance with Fred. They rallied around her, offering support and even helping her search for a job. Though the process was slow, her persistence paid off. Within 2 months, she secured a position as an accountant at a reputable firm. "You are an inspiration," her friend Ada told her over coffee one afternoon. "You've been through so much, yet here you are, rebuilding. Fred doesn't deserve you." With her first paycheck, Amaka found a modest but cozy apartment not far from her workplace. It wasn't much, but it was hers. On a bright Saturday morning, while Fred was out, she packed her belongings and left. She left no note, only a message that read, "I've taken my life back. You're welcome to visit your son whenever you wish." Life as a single mother was challenging but liberating. Amaka found joy in the small things, decorating her new home, exploring parks with her son, and savoring the independence of earning her own money. Every weekend, she carved out time for herself, heading to the gym to rebuild her strength and confidence. Slowly but surely, her body transformed, and with it, so did her spirit. One day, as she stood in front of her mirror, she smiled for the first time in months. It wasn't just about the weight she had lost or the curves she had regained. It was the fact that she was strong, stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. Her colleagues at work noticed the change. "You are glowing, Amaka," one of them remarked during lunch. "Whatever you are doing, keep it up." Meanwhile, Fred's life was unraveling. The women he brought into their matrimonial home proved fleeting, uninterested in his temper or demands. His meals went uncooked, his clothes unwashed. For the first time, he began to realize all the little things Amaka had done for him without compliments. The house, once warm and inviting, felt empty and cold. She will come back, he assured himself. She's probably just throwing a tantrum. But as weeks turned into months, the reality set in. Amaka was gone and she wasn't coming back. On a quiet evening, after putting her son to bed, Amaka sat on her balcony, sipping tea. She thought about Fred and felt no anger, only pity. She had forgiven him, not for his sake, but for her own peace. For the first time in a long time, Amaka felt truly free. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She would never again let anyone dim her light. Fred sat alone in his spacious but cold and lifeless living room. He had not wanted to admit it before, but now it was undeniable. He missed Amaka. He missed her laugh, her kindness, the way she lovingly cared for their child and the home. Most of all, he missed the version of himself he had been when she was around, before his bitterness consumed him. One day, driven by an overwhelming urge to escape his emptiness, Fred decided to visit his family in the neighboring state. Maybe the change of environment would help him clear his head. As he drove into town, he noticed a new shopping plaza that had opened recently and stopped to get gifts for his family. Inside the supermarket, Fred wandered the aisles aimlessly until his gaze landed on a familiar figure. There, standing by the bakery section, was Amaka. She looked radiant, her skin glowing, her posture confident. She was dressed simply but elegantly, her hair tied back in a neat bun. She held the hand of their now toddler son, who was excitedly pointing at a shelf of cookies. Fred froze. His heart pounded as he debated whether to approach her. Before he could think it, Amaka looked up and saw him. Their eyes met, and Fred felt a wave of emotions crash over him. Regret, longing, and shame. "Fred!" Amaka said calmly, her voice steady. "Amaka," Fred replied, his voice low and hesitant. "You look amazing." "Thank you," she said, with a small smile, her eyes guarded. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting family," Fred said quickly, trying to gather his thoughts. "And you?" "I live here now," she replied. "It's been a fresh start for me and the baby." Fred glanced at their son, who looked up at him with curiosity. The boy's resemblance to Fred was striking. "Hey, buddy," Fred said softly. The child didn't respond, but continued to stare. "He's shy," Amaka explained, "but he remembers you. I've shown him pictures." Fred's throat tightened. "Thank you for that, Amaka. I've been terrible to you. I don't know how to even begin apologizing." Amaka's expression softened, but she maintained her composure. "Fred, I've already forgiven you. Carrying anger or sentiment would only hold me back. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm willing to return to the life I had with you." Fred nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. "I understand. I don't deserve you, Amaka. I realize that now. But I want to be there for our son, if you will let me." Amaka's lip curled into a faint smile. "He deserves a father who is present. You are welcome to visit him anytime, Fred, but it has to be on my terms." "Of course," Fred said quickly. "Anything you need." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the supermarket fading into the background. Finally, Amaka spoke again. "I need to finish shopping. It was good to see you, Fred." "You too, Amaka," Fred said, stepping aside to let her pass. As he watched her walk away, Fred felt a mix of hope and despair. Hope because he still has a chance to be part of his son's life. Despair because He knew he had lost Amaka for good, but for the first time in a long while, Fred resolved to change, not to win her back, but to become a man his son could look up to. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. I'm glad you did. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories like this one. See you in the next video. Bye.